A trial in Florida just wrapped up where the parents actually made their child live in a built-in box in the garage, and he actually turned down a plea deal and took it to trial. You can imagine what happened, and we're talking about all of it in today's video. Absolute insanity. Sofa Squad, now you already know our little mascot, Mr. Roscoe here, is an elderly dog of sorts. So when it comes to feeding time, it can be a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a game, a little bit all over the place. So when Sundays reached out to me, I looked their stuff up and was like, yeah, 100%, we want a partner, and so does Roscoe. Okay, y'all, so can we just talk about the box for a second? In addition to the stuff inside being awesome, y'all, it's like a box of cereal, right? It's so nostalgic. So I mean, there's the front, obviously, little cartoon here, information all on the side here, and then the ingredients, just like a cereal box here, which I love. It's very simple to read. But y'all, the best part, oh my gosh, the back part of it has a little crossword puzzle that even me and Roscoe said I worked on. What'd you think, buddy?
Dad, one down is Sofa Squad, and so is one across, and so is 5 over. He thinks they're all Sofa Squad. Bless his heart.
So number one key ingredient for me here is the fact that it is 100% human grade ingredients. It's all natural and it's easy to store. Here's my thing when I've experimented around with different types of dog food for Roscoe, is that some of it's like, oh, you got to put it in the fridge and then you got to do this with it, that with it. This is like easy to go. It's like a box of cereal. Now, again, like I said with the ingredients in here, I mean, I'm just going to read some of these off to you. Beef heart, beef liver, beef bone, pumpkin, fish oil, sunflower oil, zucchini, kale, flaxseed seeds. I could go on, but you recognize all these words, right? I mean, these are normal things that we eat. These are good things.
I might even have to try it myself.
But let's see what this stuff's really made out of. Go ahead and buckle those seatbelts up and let's get to sleuthing. Roscoe, are you ready to see what this is made out of? Let's go ahead and give it the old 1, 2. So cute. Okay, y'all, I'm not just saying this, I swear to God. Y'all, it smells good. I mean, it smells like bacon. I mean, it smells, I'm not gonna lie, y'all, it smells good. Okay, now Roscoe, are you gonna sleep through this? The bag is easily resealable. Love that. I wanted to see what it looked like on the inside. You know I want to try it. Here's a close-up. Okay, one thing that's important for me is you see Roscoe, he's like, thank you, Dad. Loves it, thank you. So one thing that's important for me, because Roscoe is an elderly dog,
he doesn't have any teeth at this point, bless his heart,
is food for him has to be softer, it has to be able to be broken up. So already they're a win. I mean, see, he's going after it. You like that, buddy? So with this right here, it breaks apart very easily, and that's what I did. I just put a few little morsels on his little thing right there, and he ate them right up. Now, I have his cousin coming over to visit who is a young pup. He's at the other end of the spectrum on life. He's just starting off, and so I'm curious to see how he does, because I don't have to like break it up for him and whatnot. So I'm sorry, but 3 paws up over here. Good boy, you like that? You really do like that. Y'all, the fact that he ate it, like, I'm not joking, y'all. Food time here is like crazy. The fact that he's eating this, it really kind of touches my heart. Good boy. Let's see how his cousin does. Okay, so I have guest over now. You can see him running around, and let's see how Mr. Oliver does with this. This will be the true test of everything. What you think? What you think?
See, this is pretty good, dude.
Is that Canine Crunchies good? Mm-hmm. So the proof is in the pudding right here, y'all. Even Mr. Oliver seems to love it. I mean, I am just amazed at how much he likes eating out of my hand. I mean, Sundays, y'all get 2 thumbs up for me and 4, 5, 6, 7 paws up at this household from all the pups. Now, y'all, look, you've seen Roscoe, how much he loves it. I mean, I'm not lying. I think I'm going to use my own code and sign up for this, okay? It is so rare that he is into food this much. I mean, I cannot explain how much more easy this is going to make things. I mean, I'm just so happy with this. So, look. Give them a shot. Obviously, I love them. Roscoe loves them. They have cut the Sofa Squad a good deal on this one. So let's talk about what that is. So look, they're offering us 35% off the first order, y'all. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/sofa or use my code SOFA at checkout. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Well, sofas, I should say. Lord mercy. There's two of them, and guess what? We ain't back home. We're still in the mountains. We're still in the mountains. We are in the North Carolina mountains right now to see the fall foliage, and it is beautiful. I've been posting on my Instagram and all that. And speaking of, if you want to follow me on the old gram, on the old Insta, as the kids like to say, go on and do it. It's on the screen. Links in the description below. So there's that. Now, like I said, we're going to be talking about the trial that just wrapped up in Florida. Timothy Ferrider, I say his name wrong, but I apologize. He was convicted. We're going to do an overview of the case before we get into it. Now, his wife still is getting ready to approach trial. I'll be very curious to see what happened with that, or if she pleads out now or whatever, right? Because things didn't go well. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind with this is I've really enjoyed reading the comment sections on this one, because at its heart in this case, if you take away what he did and you start hearing some of the issues that were going on with the child, this is not to blame the child at all. You're like, oh God, I remember being a teenager, or I remember my teenagers, and you can kind of have this like empathy for it. But then you start hearing how they handled it and you're like, what? Like that's the last thing I would have ever have thought to have done. And so that's at the heart of it. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you watch, then you already know, right? But it's very, very complicated case in that way. And so just like trying to understand, and I guess there is no understanding, the thought process that led these parents to make this decision to build a box in the garage and keep their kid in it. I mean, I can't even these days. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to be reviewing this case and this trial via video clips, news articles, all that kind of stuff. A lot of video clips talking about it, whatnot. I'll make commentary throughout, but at the very end, we'll go more into like just kind of sitting on the sofa and dishing about it, okay? So that's it. Remember, I'm not a doctor. I ain't no lawyer. Ain't none of that fancy stuff. Just a guy with a sofa and our mascot, Roscoe, our little dog, but he's not here today. He is in our thoughts and prayers. He's okay. He's just not here in the mountains with me. He's being babysat by his little cousins. But these are just my opinions, so keep that in mind. I ain't no professional or nothing. Just a guy with a sofa and some opinions. So that being said, let's get into the overview of what happened so we're all on the same page and we can enter into discussing the case on an even playing field. Okay, so January 28th, 2022, this is Jupiter, Florida. Police are called to a home. A couple reports their son missing, and let's just hear a quick clip from the officer on the stand.
For, like, the address?
Yes.
We went to an address in Egret Landing, I believe.
Is that in Jupiter, Florida?
Yes.
In Palm Beach County?
It is.
Now, what were you responding in reference to?
A missing juvenile.
Who did you make contact with when you first arrived?
The missing juvenile's mother.
And what was her name?
I believe it was Tracy.
Okay, now we'll talk more about that and what she said, but first let's take a look very quickly at Google Maps at this neighborhood and just look at this. This is a very, it's been described as a place where everybody jogs and, a kind of upper class type neighborhood. Now look, we can go to old Google Maps here and zoom on in. I just love these things and can get lost in them for hours. So as you see, we're zooming into old Florida. Now, if you're from Florida or no Florida, whatever, a lot of these neighborhoods you'll see like this, these kind of like massive developments, and this one is no different than that. Now, I believe that they said it's not gated, which I find interesting, but this is just, it's an affluent neighborhood. The nice homes in here, and I don't mean to bring up money into this, but one thing that went through my mind with this case and the affluency or the agency of the couple was just that. With money comes agency, comes means that oftentimes can't. And so as you're going through this, or at least myself, I was like, could y'all not afford to find or do A, B, or C? With all the means and whatnot that you seem to have, this was your last resort, creating a prison in your garage. It just was like, this isn't mathing. Okay, now let's keep talking about what the cop said and what Tracy said when they arrived. So she tells the police that the child had done this on several occasions. She says that the child has all these different behavioral issues and that the child had been adopted since age 2. Now, side note, you might hear me saying the child. This is still an underage youth here, and a lot of the people testifying, or not a lot, but siblings and whatnot are. So they've omitted the name and the gender. Now, if you watch this, and I have caught on some places where they'll put the name in and that kind of stuff, but they've omitted, any identifying type stuff. I mean, and obviously no imagery and that type stuff has been shown in the court for obvious reasons. So when I'm saying the child, that's what I'm talking about. Said child is now 14, but you'll also hear in evidence and whatnot in testimony that this began years ago in a different home. This wasn't their first rodeo. Now here's also the thing, it wasn't their first rodeo with this type structure, but it also wasn't their first rodeo being on the map with the cops. Okay, because here's the thing. They had a contractor build the room in the garage. Okay. We're not talking about, I mean, I guess if you had to sit here and say they were going to do it, at least they didn't just make some like, little shack or something. But regardless, I'm not condoning that. But it's also the audacity and the entitlement to hire a third party to this and not think that was not going to send up red flags. And we'll hear his testimony. They hired a contractor. He built this. He calls the cops when it's all said and done. Now, you might be first asking, like, why did he build it in the first place? And you'll hear from him how they walked him through this to make it seem as normal as possible until the very end. Now, remember, they were saying that this was going to be an office and all this type of stuff. It was an 8x8 with its own ceiling, the door and a deadbolt lock. The knob was only on the outside of the door. There was electricity and window air conditioning and a camera in the ceiling, okay? So this is what I'm talking about. It's literally, y'all, a little prison cell in the garage. Now, we'll get more into the testimony. He's going to, the victim of the case, get on the stand and testify. And you're going to be kind of surprised to hear the things he had to say. I was very surprised by that. But they will get up there and do that. And again, we'll hear from the contractor, we'll hear from the sister, we'll hear from a teacher, all sorts of people. Now, here's the thing. The police come back, the child, the victim, has been missing for a few days. The police come back, they see the structure. The parents are like, oh, he built this, in the garage. They kind of play it off, right? I mean, how do you play this off? Anybody who would see this would immediately be thinking like, what is this for? This is giving trafficking. This is giving like a really bad energy. Now on the stand, the officer would say that it was a small room with a small box spring and mattress, a folding chair and camera, no paint, no color, bare garage floor, bare drywall. It sounded incredibly bleak. Okay, so then January 31st, a couple of days, 2-3 days later, said child returns to school, okay, not having gone home or whatever, and the security officer, or whatever you call the resource officer, sees the child on camera and it's like, we need to talk, right? So they're talking to the child and it's basically like, well, why, like, what's up? And this is the heartbreaking part, y'all. The child's reasoning for running away was, I just didn't feel loved. I mean, yeah, it gives me goosebumps. I'm trying to save some of my thoughts till the very end of it because it's hard not to with a case like this, because it's like you hear the trajectory of the child's life. I have no doubt that the child is going to have some behavioral issues, all that kind of stuff, right? But then at the bones of it, you hear, them saying, I didn't feel loved. And you're like, oh my God, it's such a gift to experience unconditional love in your lifetime, because as we've seen through these cases that we watch, not everybody gets it, right? And so often, and myself included, I mean, like, especially growing up when you don't know better, you take it for granted. I took it for granted, being like, oh, everybody has unconditional love from their parents. And then as I've gotten older, you realize, no, it's not the case, right? And it's very, very heartbreaking to see young people having that realization of, I didn't feel loved, and when you hear the evidence, you'll be like, I wouldn't either. But also during this conversation with the resource officer, this is where the sketchy story comes out, talking about Tim, the father in the case, the guy in the trial, Timothy, whatever you want to call him, how he ruled the house, right? His anger issues, that type thing, his punishments and whatnot. But also you begin to hear about the room and, oh, here's this room. I'm locked in it for like 16 hours a day. I can't get food. I have to use the bathroom in a bucket and clean it out. Anyone hearing this, especially at school, right? An officer, oh please. From a child that's been missing for 3 days. Yeah, I ran away because I didn't feel loved. Why didn't you feel loved? Well, I lived in a room in the garage. I didn't have a bathroom. No, I had to use it in a bucket and clean out the backyard. I mean, y'all, you already know that this was red flag central, as it should be. Now, here's the thing. So cops hear this story, they get a search warrant, they go back. Y'all, they got thousands and thousands of hours from ring bell footage. All of it on evidence, right? Of how the daily life, seeing this child living in the dark, seeing this child, having fits in the room, which understandably you would, right? Hearing Timothy disciplining him, yelling at him, going toe to toe. All of this stuff was on video, and they would show the jury hours of this. hours of it, which I'm glad they did to give them the vibe of you're just sitting through a few hours of this. Imagine this is your life for years. Now, of course, as you can imagine, they're charged with some charges, right? I'm talking about Timothy and Tracy. That's the couple. So at first their cases were together, and then they had them severed because I guess she said something to cops when he wasn't around, and they had the cases severed. So one thing that has been interesting is she has been sitting in the courtroom throughout this trial. Now, they both got out, right, on bail, whatever. So they've been out. So she's been watching this. Now, you already know. Like, if I was her, I'd be like, hey, what's the plea deal? Yeah, can we still get that on the table? 100% at this point. And speaking of plea deals, here's the thing. They offered Timothy 2 years. 2 years. Y'all, he's facing up to 40 now that he's convicted. Okay, it's not a cute look, right? Now, he's, of course, trying to appeal all that type of stuff, but nonetheless, I'm sure he's like, oh, what? This would have been done with if he had taken that deal. And now on him, let's go ahead for a moment and review Timothy, who he is, and we're going to go to his bio page. So on the screen, we see here a hyper-local creative media company, specialized services for healthcare providers, medical device companies, small businesses, and more. And then we see here to the left, it's hard to see, but it says Integrated Flow. That's him. That's his picture. It's a podcast. And so let's just read his little bio here. There's Mr. Tim Ferreter. Tim Dunn-Ferreter is an experienced leader, enthusiastic, and driven professional with a diverse and successful background from Fortune 500 companies to venture-backed startup organizations. Held significant roles with venture-backed startup companies that successfully went to acquisition. Adept at upstream and downstream marketing, excellent communication skills, including foreign language proficiency, high proficient in building leaders and developing strategic, high-level, long-term business relationships, has worked and lived abroad, including a European-based role and a Latin American-based role. His specialties are entrepreneurship, leadership, marketing, sales, team building, business development, management, leadership development, mentorship, sales management, training, branding, advertising, and publishing. Well, my word. Let me catch my breath. Oh my word. I mean, there were so many 10-cent words in there. I'm broke. I mean, broke, y'all. So that's the gist of who he is. Basically, he's like this high-level business guy, right? I mean, a lot of those words, I'm like, what? Upstream, downstream, left stream, right stream. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So that's Timothy. Now, before we look at some of the clips and whatnot of the opening statements and all that, let's do another kind of quick overview. Not overview, but look at a couple of articles, some screenshots that go a little bit more in depth and do some more overview of like a typical day in the victim's life and that type of stuff. Okay, so on the screen, you'll see this first thing. A probable cause affidavit was filed in Palm Beach County courts in Florida. It accuses the father and mother of unlawfully caging a child. They were accused of aggravated child abuse and false imprisonment, according to court records. Thousands of videos were obtained which showed him being repeatedly locked inside of his room daily, the affidavit says. In court, their defense attorney argued the boy may have had an attachment disorder with his parents, according to WPTV. They were released on $50,000 bond and can't have contact with their 4 children, according to the television station. Now, this next thing here shows us the victim told police on a typical morning he is woken up because his door is locked. He is told to go to the bathroom and then back to his room. The door was locked and usually the lights were turned off. After his other siblings were dropped off at school, he would be fed breakfast, a banana, and a piece of bread and peanut butter. When he was finished eating, he would go to school. After school, he would come back into the room. He said it was 8x8 and had a lockable doorknob and deadbolt lock that both locked from the outside. He would be locked in there and had to stay in his room. He said he was in there a lot. Now, the irony of this is the routine that you heard him talking about that we just read through of his daily basis. That's basically what Tim's going through right now in jail. I mean, literally, it's like, okay, this is, you can't make it up, right? So he's going to get a taste of his own medicine. So these are the things that we'll talk about later also, because I'm just like, okay, so I'm assuming that they're in their mentality, well, we lock him in there because we have to leave the house to go take the kids and all this. And I'm like, could you not maybe hire like a nanny or something that can help you look after the other children? And maybe they did this, you know, but this is what I'm talking about. To be like, okay, come out of your room, use the bathroom, here's a banana, go back in, I'm taking the kids, we'll come back. I mean, that's the part where I'm like, you had this other agency to do stuff, meaning not agency like an agency, but like, you know, the means to do things. And so to resort to this right here is what's just shocking about it. Now, let's move on to some of the video clips and let's hear some of these opening statements. Now, we're going to begin with the state and hear what they're saying, what case they're laying out for the jury.
This morning, you're going to learn that on January 28th, 2022, he ran away from home. He lived in Jupiter, Florida at that time with his parents, the defendant, Tim Ferreter, and his mom, Tracy Ferreter. You're going to hear that he was adopted as a child, as a small child, a toddler age, from Vietnam, and he had lived with the Ferreters since that time. He was the second of their 4 children. He has an older sister named, who you're also going to get to hear from at this during this trial, a younger sister named, and a much younger little brother named, who was about 3 years old when all of this happened.
Now, a couple of things with this clip I wanted to put up. Number one, it's just very quickly laying out, we're hearing, we're sat in the resource, basically, okay? Now, but also, he was adopted at age 2, okay? So this is not, and not that it matters, this is not someone that came into the house, 6 months ago. With a plethora of things, they've already lived their life. This is like a child integrated into this family from a very young age, okay? So that's what makes it more like, okay. Now, again, you've heard what's talked about already, this, attachment disorder and all this type of stuff that's going to be brought up throughout. And this is what gets tricky. And we'll get more into this with the defense, because when you're talking about, number one, a child, right? Period, end of story. It's a child, okay? It's a child. I just can't wrap my mind around that. And you're talking about these psychological issues and disorders and this and that, and and it gets very tricky, because once the defense gets up here, it feels like edging on victim blaming, okay, with what the defense is saying, and it's like, just because you have these things going on, again, that to me would almost signal more of, well, don't you have the ability to get into some form of resources more? I don't know. I do see how, we see how it goes with these other cases where, it's like people are left to dry and people end up doing harm, like really bad, taking the lives of their children and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to say that the system's this great unbroken thing, right? I get it. But just to arrive at where they have as their, well, this is the answer, just really surprises me. Now, also, you heard in here how the blips, they go in and out, where they're like blocking out kids' names and stuff like that, or identifying features and whatnot. So just know it's not your computer that's doing that, or your phone, whatever you're listening on. You're going to hear that throughout this. So just be prepared for that. Let's move on to the next clip.
You're going to hear that as part of the investigation, during that initial walkthrough of the room, Detective Sharp realized that that small cell-like room had a ring camera in the corner to observe the occupant of the room, because that ring camera captured moment after moment of life in that room. You're going to hear over and over and over again that door locking and unlocking, because the evidence is going to show that that room was not a room that could come and go from as he pleased. He was locked inside from the outside over and over again.
Now, just side note, y'all, my computer is down here. That's why I'm looking sometimes down here. I'm kind of watching along with y'all. Okay, so here, describing that and the locking the door, like I said, Tim's literally going through this right now with his jailers, okay? That's just the sweet karma of it, right? Is he's literally experiencing what they put the child through. Again, when you sit here and think of this kid, and when you hear the sibling get up there talking about, oh no, we didn't get that punishment, like only this child did, how heartbreaking is that, right? And he will admit, yeah, I did do these things, like I did do A, B, and C, and that's what's even more heartbreaking about it, is you're just like, did he know in those times? Imagine him sitting in that room with the lights off, hungry, needing to go to the bathroom. How humiliating that would be. Just how awful that would be, that poor child. Let's go on to the next little grouping of clips here.
You're also going to see that he did not have the ability to control things like the lights in that room, that the only way that those lights could be controlled was outside the room. And so you're going to see him sitting in the dark in a windowless room for hours at a time. And we're not just talking from 10 p.m. till 7 o'clock in the morning overnight. You're going to see that even during the day, there are times in which his parents, the defendant and his wife, would turn off that light and leave their 14-year-old son locked in a room in the dark. As part of the evidence in this case, you're going to hear that the defendants are charged with that 4-week period. That 4 to 6 week period, because the family moved to Jupiter, Florida in December of 2021. Mid-December, kind of a week or two before Christmas, And this all happens at the end of January. So we're talking about 6 weeks when they are in Palm Beach County, Florida. We're here today because of the actions of Tim Ferritter towards his son. They were ongoing, they were intentional, and they were criminal. And so at the end of this trial, after you have heard all of the evidence, all of the testimony and the law from Judge Coates, we're going to ask you for the only verdict that is supported by the evidence and the law. And that's a verdict of guilty as charged.
Okay, so here's the thing with that. First of all, the video camera always gets everybody, right? The fact that they had all this evidence on there, but her describing like the daytime with him sitting there and the lights turned off in the room, I mean, come on, right? It's like, it's literally, she's describing a jailer situation. But also, notice what if you remember them just saying, this was from a 4 to 6 week period. They were already doing this in Arizona for years, okay, already. And we're going to hear that evidence that makes it even more like, oh, so this was just the routine. They were that comfortable with this whole process. And that's what the evidence will show. But also, to me, when you hear some of the evidence, you're going to hear, they might have been comfortable, but they knew something was up, because when the contractor will describe how they walked him through building this room so he wouldn't be alarmed over anything, it's like, okay, they were comfortable about it, but they knew this isn't right. People are going to be alarmed over this. We better be a little bit incognito with it. Now, let's hear a few clips from the defense, from Tim's defense, to hear what kind of case they're laying out for the jury.
This is just a handful of the consistent and escalating behaviors we continue to engage in. And he himself will tell you, as the state said in their opening, that he knows that things are wrong, and he continues to do them. He knows that there are consequences, and he continues to do them. So they try to get him into activities to kind of take out his energy. And when they see that's not working, they do counseling. They give him the medications that he's prescribed. They try to help him sleep at night because he keeps wandering the house. They cut sugar from his diet on the recommendation of a pediatrician, that maybe that'll help his behavior. And there will be some videos of that. It's not always going to look pretty, just as it doesn't look pretty in real life when a parent gets mad at their kid.
Okay, now we hear from the defense. And this is what I was talking about. And we'll hear more like when she's on the defense attorney, is talking to him on the stand and whatnot. Not on the stand, but, going through the testimony. And it's like, it gets into this victim blaming thing, because when she's describing, like, he knew there was consequences, he knew this, and I'm like, yeah, you're describing like every kid, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is any kid, right? This is any adult for that matter in this day and age. This is not going to sit well with the jury, because here's the thing: at the end of the day, whether it's a juror, whether whoever, we're going to hear this stuff, and we're going to put ourselves in the situation. Like, for me, I don't have children. And so I look at my own experience, which we'll talk more about towards the end, with like people that I know who are in the foster care system, not kids, but like adults working in it. My own experience, like volunteering and working with aging out programs, stuff like that. Families, children, all this kind of stuff, right? Then I look at myself as a teenager, okay? And so, especially for people who have their own children, who their children have gotten, whether they're grown up or currently teens or whatever, right? It's like, it's the weirdest thing. They knew there was consequences, but they kept doing it. And you're just like, hello, like, this is like kids 101, you know what I'm saying? That being said, we tried to get them in A, B, C, and D. I have no doubt, okay, and the evidence shows that the Ferriters were doing all this stuff. They get them in activities, do this, do that, I get when you have a troubled child, which I don't really know in comparison. I mean, I don't mean to compare people to people, but it's like, the Richter scale of what this child was doing, I'm like, have y'all seen Dr. Phil? This is not Dr. Phil stuff, okay? Let's just put it that way. This ain't Dr. Phil level stuff. So I'm like, this is, not great, some of the actions, but we don't also build him a little prison in the garage over this either. It's like 0 to 100 with nothing in between.
He had been engaging in dangerous behaviors. He's walking around at night, and they did not know if an infant could be safe within in the house. And that is when they made the decision, while he lived inside their home in Arizona, this is not in the garage, this is in a house, to put a lock on his door. And that was not for the purpose of keeping him locked inside at all times. It was not for the purpose of even punishment. It was for the purpose of monitoring him when they couldn't.
Now, again, the defense is going to do what the defense is going to do, and they are going to try to tell his side of the story and to paint this out in the best light possible. What I just said times two from the clip I said before, people who have their own children, or children not their own, but children, we've been kids, all that, locking someone in a room like this, and not even a room in the garage, right? In my mind, I'm like, what if something happened? Would you hear them? Now, granted, there's a ring bell out there, but this is where I'm also like, if you're monitoring said child for fear of safety from this, that, and the other, why not enable other kids and household members to be able to lock their own doors? Why not put ring cameras and monitoring cameras throughout? You can get the devices, and we'll talk about this too from an experience I saw that was like required from this foster home to do for specific children, where it alarms you when their door comes and goes and opens and closes, like a ring, like a doorbell thing that you have, but you put it inside the house, right? Why not hire an overnight nanny to just come and monitor the home, not even specifically to take care of the infant, but to monitor the home, to be like, hey, what are you getting out of your room for? Do you need to do that? Whatever. There's like a bazillion things in my mind that I'm like, and again, that I think you could do. And again, I'm not some moral authority on this, right? I don't have children of my own. I get it. Like, I'm just sitting here from the sofa casting my opinions, okay? I haven't walked in their shoes. Yeah, but I'm also like, but they were doing well. And I'm not saying, I could lock them in the room if they didn't have money. It's not that at all. But I'm also like, you had all these means where you could do some of the stuff that somebody who didn't have money would probably use as an excuse. Well, we couldn't hire people and we couldn't do this, so we just locked them up. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you have all these other options to do that. I get you might not want to have a stranger in your home overnight. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get that. But if it ensures a level of safety, and a level of safety is not locking a child up in the garage. Because again, y'all, if you follow me, when we talk about these cases, it reminds me of the couple that recently was convicted of putting their 13-year-old disabled daughter in the backseat of the car while they sat on the porch feet away, and she suffered a 5-hour death in the heat, and you learn that they did this all the time, and you're like, what? And I'm just like, my anxiety would never allow me. I could not sleep. I don't care if there's a ring camera that I could see how the child was doing or whatever in the garage. I'm like, what if there's fire? You think they're going to take the time to run out of that garage? What if he had a heart attack? What if the ceiling caved in? What a bazillion things that my anxiety is just running through. I could never, but that's just me, right? Other people might get to the point of, I was fine with it, whatever. Obviously they were. Anyways, I could keep going on. Let's go to the next clip.
Once was born, they needed a baby room. So they built a room in the Arizona house in the garage. It had a bed, it had a desk, it had Legos. You'll hear from witnesses who actually saw that room and showed it to them. Took them in and said, hey, look at my room, and showed them all the toys that he had and the books that he had in the room in Arizona.
Now, here's one thing, too. So, as a teenager, but they're talking right here from the Arizona room, this is like an 11-year-old, okay? This is a kid. Also, me talking about all the safeties and dangers and stuff like that. Also, there's this, what if the child is in the room crying because they feel left out? You know what I mean? Like, imagine, just sit here and think about that process for a minute of the kid is in the garage in this separate room, shut out and alone. Imagine how, not homesick, but how left out they felt. Obviously enough to run away. Now, as a teenager, a 16, 17-year-old, oh, please. Anybody be like, yo, please, can we do that? Can I please have my own room in the garage or the basement or whatever? I get it, right? But if you can come and go, this is the huge difference. And again, as a teen, if your parents were like, oh, we're going to make the garage your room. Sign me up. Hello? But you would, normal situations, you could come and go. You would have a bathroom, for God's sakes, right? This is a prison cell. This is the difference. But key note here, and I keep pointing to the computer, I'm sorry. They were in Arizona doing this when he was 11 years old. This was old hat to them. This was the routine. This was normalized.
So right before Christmas of 2021, that's when we get to sort of the time relevant in this case. The Ferreters moved back to Jupiter, where they lived many, many years ago when the kids were young. And they decided to build a similar room for It had the bed, desk, books, and toys. You'll see videos of him in his room. He's reading. He's talking to his friends. He has Legos there. He is not allowed to have technology in his room alone because that's not something that they felt was safe, but he had other types of activities. He did have like a school Chromebook that was provided by the school. You'll see him FaceTiming with a friend of his. He had posters up on the wall that he, when he got angry, ripped down himself. That's why the walls will look bare.
Now, again, the defense is going to try and make this out to be as cute as possible. He had this, he had that, but. Now, we'll hear when she's talking to the child on cross-examination, whatever, where she'll walk through having him basically explain, he was the one that tore the posters down. I was the one that did this, that type of stuff, but it will backfire several times. Because when cops find this room, it's like, this is just bare drywall. It's like, not even really like a kid's room. It's more like just a, 4 walls, a ceiling, a floor, and like a prison cell, right? Imagine finding it. Well, again, imagine finding this room, but there's no lock on the door. Like, you can come and go. There's your own, but if you can come and go, then you can go to the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? So there's that part to it too. So it's like, the whole thing. But this is some of the testimony that you're going to hear later on that makes you say, this just feels a little bit like victim blaming. This never goes well in any of these cases that we watch when a child has been harmed or, God forbid, their life taken. And the defense is going to try and reason that, or make an excuse of some variety for it. Everyone has been a child. Everyone has interacted with a child. And so there's 9 out of 10 times people are going to be like, just your own experience. I can't imagine my parents making me live in the garage and use the bathroom in a bucket. That alone, right there with that evidence, is like, why would you even take this to trial? Why would you even take this to trial? Imagine being a child and being locked in a room and you have to go to the bathroom in the dark in a bucket and clean it out yourself. I don't care what you have done behaviorally, right? Just take that away. A kid doesn't understand that. All the kid knows is, well, my family's in the house, and especially if you're going in this, I'm an adopted child. I mean, come on, right?
Both the room in Arizona and the one in Florida had one very big design flaw, and that is that it did not include a bathroom. And this means that at night when he was in the room and couldn't be supervised, had to use a bucket for the bathroom if he needed to use the bathroom. During the day, he was permitted to move about the house freely and he could utilize the bathroom in the house itself. But he had to make tough choices to protect his son, to protect the other kids in his home, and to protect the community from a child who was already showing, a screwdriver in class, hitting other kids. He had to do that.
This is what I'm talking about. He had to do it. He had to protect the community. Clearly, there's some stuff going on. You'll hear some of this things, the evidence. Now, some of it I'm like, isn't this just kids being kids? And again, no doubt there's some stuff going on here, right? I mean, the child has not had a great life. I mean, well, first of all, look at the parents that he had, number one. Number two, adopted, like issues that come with that, some, attachment stuff. I get that, right? But to arrive at this, and then when you get on the stand, and not the stand, but like when you hear the defense, like, oh, he had to do it. This was, it was the only thing that he could do. He was protecting the family. He was doing this. And yeah, I mean, at nighttime, he would have to go to the bathroom in a bucket. But, he's taking one for the team. Now, the sister will tell a different story of this. Oh, he could walk around the house and do this and do that and blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's a different story that she's going to tell than what this defense attorney is painting out here. So, again, this is where you just start to lose it, where it's like, what? No, absolutely not. There's no way you can sell to anybody the okayness of making a kid defecate and urine in a bucket overnight and sit in a room with it when you're living in $1 million home. Are you kidding? Okay, so now let's move into some of that other evidence and some of that other testimony. We're going to switch gears and we're going to go over to Court TV and look at Vinny. at an interview that he did with the contractor and just look at a couple of clips of that. Because again, this is the person who built the room, right? Now, if you had questions about like, well, why did he build it? Listen to this and see how he walked them through this. And keep in mind, keep this lens on as you watch it, as you listen to it, whatever you're doing. If they didn't think something was wrong with this, or this was the only thing they could do, or whatever, look at how they walked him through building this. Let's roll that tape.
Contractor who built the box in the Farrier's garage, Jacques Ben Aim, is with us. Jacques, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And first of all, unbelievable, great job contacting authorities after building this box.
Okay, so side note, I want to interrupt Vinny real quick. Kudos to Vinny for thanking the man for see something, say something, basically. So many people don't do that anymore, and it's amazing that this guy contacted authorities. So hats off to him, because especially in this society we live in now, where people, I don't want to get involved, or or whatever. I'm not paying attention. Let me just get the money, whatever. So kudos to this man for doing that, because he's part of the reason why justice has been served.
What did they say? What did they say was the reason they needed this box? And what were some of the specs or the specifications that they wanted built inside their garage?
And I got a lead about a person who wants to build an office in his garage. So I got the phone number of the owner. I called him, and he said, listen, I live in Arizona. I have an office in my garage, and I just bought a house in Jupiter, Florida, that we are very close to move in, and I want to build the same exact office in the garage.
Okay, so first of all, you hear him. I've got a house in Jupiter. I'm coming down there, or I've got a house in Arizona. We're coming down to Jupiter. I've got this office. I'm going to build the same thing. So, okay, cool. Like, what you got, buddy? Let's do it.
And he asked me on top of that to build a ceiling for that box under the existing ceiling, away from the AC, to cool this office. And he said, yeah, this is a good idea, but I will do it later, so don't worry about it.
Wow.
And so far it was okay for me. So every day when I finish the work, I used to FaceTime him and show him the work we did. And he asked me to go to the Home Depot and buy a deadlock like you have in the main door of your house. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. You can lock it up so whoever goes in can't get out. And
No. This is not there yet. He asked me to add a deadlock to the door. And I said, okay. I don't know what. You have important things to keep in this office. So it wasn't look strange to me. So I went to the Home Depot and I bought the deadlock, and I installed it on top of the handle lock. And then I picture it for him, as you can see in the picture I send you. And then he asked me to reverse the locks.
Y'all heard that. You hear how he walked him through that. Oh, I got this office. I want to do this. Now, first of all, the whole thing, he's like, bro, it's Florida. It's going to get really hot. We'll worry about it later. You'll hear testimony from the victim talking about it was so hot. Now, he did end up with a window unit. Now, I'm not trying to say, oh, so it's okay. But again, I'm just talking the stages of walking them through. So here this contractor is. Now, it might have been weird at first, okay, we want an office, but I mean, he's probably seen weirder, right? And he could have been like, maybe they were just a little bit freaky, Tracy and Tim. They just don't want to say. They just don't want to say. So he's like, I'll build this, of course, But then the whole thing of, oh, now we need a deadbolt. Okay, well, that's normal, right? It's an office. Maybe, whatever. Then they wanted me to reverse it. That right there, I would have been like, I mean, especially a dude calling you, hey, yeah, I got this office in my garage, this boxed in thing. I mean, how many cases have we seen like this, right? Where, come on, okay? Thank God he called. How could you not call authorities over that? It's like, this is giving, like, again, like trafficking, like blank dungeon, some eerie stuff. And especially when it's like, okay, they have kids and you want this, what? No AC, a ceiling under the ceiling. Yikes, okay. The only next thing for this would have been like if it was an underground thing. Like, yo, what is an underground bunker? Can't roll my eyes hard enough. Let's go on to the next thing. Now, the next thing is we're going to hear from the defendant's son, the alleged victim in this case. So trigger warning with this, he is going to be describing what's going on, what's taking place, and some of the things. So if this part bothers you, just skip over it. I completely understand. Now, I haven't put anything like graphic up here or anything, you know what I'm saying? But you're just going to hear from some things. But the first thing we're going to hear from is I was like, wow, that's... wow, I can't believe that he's saying this towards them. But it also shows you, to me, it's like at the end of the day, this is a child just wants to be loved, right? Now, I have no doubt there's kids out there that, can be bad and this and that and push you to the limit. I get it, right? I mean, good Lord, I was one of them, But hearing this, him say this, it's another one of those like, yeah, this isn't going to bode well in the jury room for you, honey, like, at all.
We say that question again?
Sure. Do you think it's hard to think of good memories when everyone around you has a bad image of Tim and Tracy in their mind?
I can easily recall the good times, but not. I don't have a bad image of Tim and Tracy. They just made a mistake. They were just acting out of frantic surprise of my actions. They weren't. I believe that they weren't trying to do any harm. Yeah. I believe that people should recognize that was a mistake and forgive them and move on.
Let me gather myself. I don't know about a side note. Okay, so it's morning time. Well, it's mid-morning. It's like 9:30 when I'm filming this. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm more like in tune with my feelings and whatnot, if that makes sense. And what I'm getting at is like this, like, is like kind of making me a little bit teary-eyed. Like my face is doing that feeling where, like right before you're like, I think I'm going to cry. Like that's what my face is doing right now. And I'm especially like that in the morning time. Like I do my creative stuff in the morning, like research or writing, all that. And so I just think it's interesting. Is anybody else like that? Where maybe I'm more desensitized by the end of the day by just life in general, you know what I mean? So anyways, but hearing him say that, I'm like, rip my heart out and throw it on the ground and stomp on it, and him to be like, I don't think they were trying to be mean or whatever. They were just, reacting to my behavior and whatnot. And I don't know these people. I wasn't in the household, so I can't say, oh, I think they were trying to damage him or whatever. I would like to think that they weren't, right? I would like to think that these were just really bad decisions that they made. And especially for somebody who already has these, behavioral issues coming forth, where it's like, and the defense will say in closing, we get that these this stuff that Tim and Tracy did exaggerated these, issues that he had. So, but again, he's also a child. This is, a just teenager saying this, which kudos to him, but it's also like he doesn't have that perspective to look back and be like, bro, there's a million things they could have done before they did this to you. You know what I'm saying? But it just rips your heart out. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm like, right here, Tim should have been like, I should have took that plea deal. I should have took the plea deal because, honey, that right there is all the jury needs to hear, okay? And it's a wrap.
I want to talk about the different rooms that you had. We'll start with Arizona, okay?
Okay, now, complete side note. Y'all, when this panned by, I was like, is that Casey Anthony? Because, you know, she's working with that attorney in Florida. Now, it's not her, but I was like, hold up. The day that I see her in a courtroom, again, you know what I'm saying? Not for the reason she was there. I was like, please tell me this is going to be the most Florida thing I've ever seen in my life. But it wasn't her. Sorry, I just had to say that. Oh, let's keep going.
So the first room you had, not the first room, but what the state was talking about was a room inside the house in Arizona that ultimately had a lock placed on it. Is that right?
Yes.
And that room had a lock placed. That room had a window.
Yes.
It had a desk.
Yes.
It had a dresser.
Yes.
It had a bed.
Yes.
And it had a closet.
Yes.
And you said it also had a coffee table for you to play chess,
Yeah.
which you're still really good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that door was not always locked.
No.
There were times that you could move in and out for freely from that door.
Yes.
Okay. The next room.
Okay, that little thing she said about the chess thing, I was like, oof, so cringy, right? But you hear where she kind of will like walk through this stuff and it kind of backfires on her a little bit on things where it's like, well, this room had this and this room had that and and yes it's yes and this had that and and all this type of stuff. And so this is what I'm talking about where I'm like, you know, we'll hear more evidence forth where he'll disagree with something she says, and not in like a bad way, but just like it's just what it is, and it makes it that much more cringy.
This room, but use the garage to like watch movies and stuff, right?
Yes.
But this garage room was built specifically for you,
Yes.
and it had a bed,
Yes.
it had a desk,
Yes.
and it had a dresser.
Yes.
And you think it was about an 8x10 or 8x9 room as well.
Yes.
It also had stuff on the walls, right?
Yes.
I think you had like a periodic table on it. Is that a yes?
Yes.
But then sometimes you would get angry and rip that stuff off the
Yes.
walls, right?
Yes.
Tim and Tracy never took that stuff off the walls. And that room also was not always locked.
That room was always locked.
Okay, so it's your testimony that at no point could you sort of move freely in and out of that room in Arizona.
I cannot. That door was always locked.
Yeah, that doesn't go over well. So this is what I'm talking about. As the evidence comes forth and it's like, oh, so this was going on in Arizona. You just got caught in Florida, you know. And that's why they're like, look, we're looking at this 4 to 6 week period. You know, so they were doing this in Arizona, and it's a slippery slope because it almost sounds like, hey, we need an infant room. You can go out here. But remember, he was much younger then. So that's the part that it's like, you know, and it sounds like what would happen is it's almost like privileges, but also basic human rights were taken away as punishments. Again, not having access to a restroom overnight, and especially being almost 50 at this point, I'm like, I can't imagine, right? I mean, that's like, please, it would not bode well, but also this was, you know, a child whose bladder is probably fully functioning. Not that it makes it okay. Now, also, if you notice on the screen, it says in that thing where under the box where it says, told cops all kids used it sometimes. So here's the thing. This is where you start to see, well, if this was, you know, not bad and okay, why are we trying to be shady about it? You know, that's where it's like, you knew deep down, talking about the parents, that this was not cool.
Now I want to take you to the room in Florida, which was built in December of 2021, okay?
All right.
That was an 8x8 room, right?
Yes.
That room also had a bed, a desk, a dresser, right?
No dresser.
No dresser, I'm sorry, just a bed and a desk, right?
Yes.
And then the clothes you said would actually be kept outside the room.
Yes.
And part of that was because you would sometimes hide electronics in there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you have like ripped up your clothes before too?
I only done it once, and that was in Arizona, but I don't rip my clothes.
Okay.
But not on a regular basis.
All right, but sometimes when you get angry, or at least one time, you did rip up all your clothes.
Again, this is what I'm talking about. You've ripped your clothes up too? Well, only like maybe once. Some of this behavior just comes across, especially to a jury, to an onlooker, is like, okay, this is a child. They got mad. They have some behavioral issues. They ripped their clothes up. I mean, you know, this isn't, you know, how did we arrive at locking them in the garage?
It's not that I was warm enough. It was that I was too warm. And we had a fan. We put a fan in my room.
I see. So you had you had sheets and a bed, right? or like sheets and a pillow
Yes.
and a blanket.
Yes.
And then you also had the air conditioning unit installed there.
Yes.
And sometimes, I know the state talked about how you weren't allowed to have electronics in your room. Those electronics were removed, right?
Yes.
And is that because of things that you did with electronics?
I didn't do all that. I did nothing wrong with well, yeah, I did go into a bunch of schools things and do some not so legal stuff, and I would factory reset school laptops and tablets.
Yeah, and so they would take away your electronics when you got in trouble with the school for kind of messing with their IT system, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. So the defense is bringing up these points of, the electronics and stuff like that. Going in a factory resetting the school stuff. It's not funny. But I'm just like, that's creative. That's creative. So yeah, I can understand on some level being like, okay, well, we're going to take away A, B, or C, whatever. This is, normal privileges being taken away. Now, I don't know how it works, especially in each state with students and all this, but like with this right here, where it's like, it's almost like kids have to have access to laptops to do their schoolwork and stuff like that. But I mean, in any normal household, it's like, well, we're going to take blank away because you did this. That's completely normal, right? Now, again, I would get to the point of being nervous that the child would not have access to some form of communication while in there. So I get that. But the point I'm getting at is that there's these normal things that a parent would be like, let me take this privilege away because you did blank. I get that. If my kid hijacked the school and went into their thing and reset all their stuff, I mean, number one, I'd be horrified. I'd be like, you're lucky you're not going to catch charges over that. This is major, right? Obviously would be taking some technology away, so there's give and take here. But again, it's all under the guise of, or the umbrella of, we have built this room that we lock our child in the garage, right? So again, it's almost like the example that I use of like, oh, well, here's the Trojan horse we've sent into town that looks normal and whatever. The child, hijacked the school's computer system. They took the thing away. Great. But then when the soldiers come out at night, it's like, but also the child was having to use the bucket to use the bathroom. Child was locked in a room. It's like, what? Like, no, how did we arrive there? Okay, so let's move on to a little bit more testimony. Let's just look at one clip from one of the teachers at the school. And what you're going to hear is her talking about a situation that went down where he, meaning the victim, came in and did something to his sister in a classroom. But let's let her tell it.
He came into my classroom and asked if he could make an announcement to my class, which at that point in time, it was a regular thing for teachers to send students to other classrooms to make announcements. So I said, yes, you can make an announcement to the class. So he walked to the front of the class and started to say things where I quickly realized he was not sent by another teacher. He to humiliate her in front of the whole class. He made her cry. And once I caught on to this wasn't to the fact that he was not making an announcement sent by another teacher, I stopped him and I asked him to go back to his own classroom.
Okay. A couple of thoughts on this one right here, this clip. So first of all, and I'm not trying to say right, wrong, or indifferent to anybody involved, but my first thought was, I can't imagine a classroom allowing a student to come in and be like, hi, I want to make an announcement to the class from the teacher from next door. Okay, go for it. I mean, it's almost like they were begging for something like this to happen, right? Now, obviously, there's other part of, well, you're teaching children to be respectful and responsible. I get that. I'm not trying to make excuses for him or whatever. He humiliated his sister, and we'll talk about some of my thoughts, which are non-professional, but why I think he might have done something like that. But I'm like, I would have, if I was a teacher, I would be like, well, come tell me what the thing is first. You know what I'm saying? To like, or have a note from the teacher so that it's like, we can assure that this is what's going to be said. Granted, you can't change something when somebody starts saying it, but at least it can alleviate that a little bit if it's obviously a fake thing. Now, when it's talking about going in here and humiliating the sister and all this, all the reasonings behind it, I wasn't there. I don't know. I don't live in the household. I don't run the classroom. But hearing the humiliation that he went through at home, I'm like, well, he would probably learn to do this to others, right? Not saying the parents did this specifically to him, but it's almost like hurt people, the bully turn into bullies. This is not every case, but you know what I'm saying. And so for him to go into the classroom and do this, I'm like, yeah, it's not right. And obviously he needs to be reprimanded for this. You know, you don't want to do that to your sister. I mean, I get it, right? That's not a good thing. But I just look at what was being done to him and I'm like, well, what did you think was going to happen, right? I mean, he's going to lash out even more and in different ways by being isolated in his own home like this. Now, speaking of, let's hear a few clips from another one of their daughters testifying about what daily life was like from her perspective in the home.
You said that in January in 2022, everyone lived together. And where did you live? What city did you live in?
We lived in Jupiter.
Is that in Palm Beach County?
Yes.
Now, growing up in the time that you were living in Jupiter, maybe one before, who was kind of the rule maker for your parents?
Timothy, my dad.
Was Tracy involved in enforcing the rules or making the rules?
She helped support the parents.
Okay. But who was the one that dictated what the rules and what you had to follow?
Tim.
If you had a dispute or disagreement about a rule or whether or not it was fair, is that something that you could talk about with Tim?
No.
Okay. And why is that?
Because he would reason us out of it, or I just wouldn't be able to say anything.
Was he the disciplinarian in the house?
Yes.
Now, this is nothing new. This is nothing surprising. Oftentimes the male is the disciplinarian. Oftentimes the male is, you know, don't make me tell your dad when he gets home and that type thing. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just kind of how it is in a lot of households. So for her to say, you know, oh, Tim was the one who made the rules. Tim was the one who did this. I mean, obviously it doesn't look good for him. You know, it kind of shows that he's the one dictating this is how this is going to go down. And I mean, clearly it was, right? Now, for her to also say or question, well, could you talk to him about this or that? It sounded like it was my way or the highway. I'm the parent, you're the child, don't question it type environment, at least with him in that scenario. Again, this is nothing new. This is nothing surprising. We see this oftentimes in homes of I'm the authority, don't question me. But given the context of this, when you have this going on over here, and then that accompanying it with, again, another one of your children getting up and testifying to this, it doesn't look good. Now, let's hear a little bit more of her testimony.
To walk freely through the house.
No.
Was he allowed to do something like watch TV in the living room?
Not alone.
Were you allowed to be available to Ronan in the kitchen?
No.
Would he be allowed to go and take a snack out of the fridge?
No.
What about get a drink of water if he was thirsty? Is that something he would be allowed to do?
Maybe water if someone watched him.
Only if someone watched him. And only if he's out of the room.
Yes.
Were you allowed to take a snack if you were hungry?
Okay, now this is the part that I'm saying is heartbreaking. Listen to her describing what life was like for him there. He sounded like he was under lock and key at all times. And one place that my heart breaks in this is when she's describing that. And I'm like, God, I would feel so left out and shunned. And shunned is a word that comes to my mind for this. So when we hear the testimony of, oh, well, he left, he ran away from home, he's saying because he didn't feel loved. I'm like, I mean, I want to either, right? I mean, listen to this, like how the household was ran. It sounds so sad. It sounds so heartbreaking. I mean, just to think like, oh, you have to be monitored, you have to do this, oh, he couldn't get this, well, he could get that, well, he couldn't be out here unless he was this or that, and again, hey, if the behavior elicits it to where it's like, look, this is out of control, we need to monitor A, B, and C, whatever, because like I said earlier, it's like, well, what if you had a nanny or somebody to come in to help with the other kids and this and that? I mean, again, I'm all for a parent looking at a behavior and saying, look, this is a situation we might need to do A, B, and C with. But when you start taking away things like bathroom, food, water, locking, safety, that type of stuff, that's where it's obviously an issue. And so to hear other kids like, oh yeah, we had this not normal life, but you know what I'm saying? They weren't under this lock and key. And we see other cases like this where the family kind of takes this out on one child in the household for whatever reason. And then the other kids might live this normal life, but this one said child is like going through severe abuse at home. It's heartbreaking for everyone because the other children, look at what that puts them under of they're carrying this dirty secret too.
Did you ever see Ty or Ronan get punished
Yes.
How was it different?
It was either more extreme or something completely different than what we were seeing.
Were you ever locked in your room or prevented from leaving?
No.
Did you ever have to go to the bathroom only in a bucket?
No.
Were you ever required to be alone in your room in the dark?
No.
And this is what I'm talking about. Did you have to use the bathroom in a bucket? Were you locked in your room? Did you do this? I mean, imagine your sibling going through that, and that's kind of like probably normalized to some of them. Like, oh, that's just how it is. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you go by what your parents say. You go by the reality that they create. And so, I mean, yeah, you can start to question it, but oftentimes, especially depending on your age, that just might be your normal. So if your normal is, oh yeah, that's my brother. He lives in the garage, you know, locked up, whatever. That's his pee bucket. I mean, you know, and that's what's so hard as an adult to hear it, is this extreme form of punishment or extreme form of like way of life instilled on this young man. So all that being said, you can imagine how this testimony would go over in the courtroom and with the jury and whatnot. So let's move our way towards the closing arguments and see what the state had to say.
There is an indication that the child may have been medically vulnerable because of past trauma. And instead of doing anything productive to assist that child, they did the worst possible thing you could do. Now, beyond the direct testimony, the photographs in this case, we have hours of Ring camera because the defendant recorded every single moment in that room. And like we said, it's not a continuous stream. It's 1-minute videos related to action. But we have hours of the treatment, of the confinement to prove, to corroborate alone.
You want to take this thing to the next level? Let's do it. Let's do it in Florida too. Let's do it in Florida too. Let's go.
And so you don't have to take extreme that it was dehumanizing. We have the direct evidence of his actions. This is not a concerned father trying to make a reasonable correction to a behavioral issue. This is a man that is angry. This is a man that has actual malice, that has physical aggression and anger, because we see him put his hands on him, throw him on the bed, put his hands on his neck, scream on him, and then turn out the lights. And so his son is in an 8x8 box. The area that you're sitting in is bigger than that. Oh.
Sustain.
You can use your common sense for how big 8 feet is. Alone. And remember, we're looking through a camera that is has some night vision capabilities.
So now what you just heard in some of that closing argument statements there is some of the ring footage, the evidence that was shown during the trial of the direct evidence of what was going on. You heard the father, you heard that anger, you know, putting his hands on him, you know, the whole 9 yards, right? Then what goes into my mind after listening to that is I'm like, imagine that happening, that interaction, and then you're left in that room all alone in the pitch dark with your thoughts. Imagine what he felt like, knowing your family's in the rest of the house. And especially if it's something where you're like, I know my behavior is not what it should be. I want to change it. I don't know how. I don't, you know, like you have something going on, which, I mean, who doesn't, right? You know, to varying degrees, especially during those turbulent teenage years and those younger, you know, years. So hearing that, I was like, oh my that's what makes your heart break, right? Now, the part where I loved it when she made the comparison of the jury box to the thing, and like apparently you can't do that. She's like, you can use your common sense to know 8 feet. I love it when like whether the defense or the state or whatever just talks in like common sense terms. Like, do the math. Y'all got it. Let's watch the next clip.
This is his life, continuous, even in the best case scenario. But we know that it was more insidious than that, because we look at the duration. January 6th, he goes in at 8:10 p.m. That's when they lock up the door for the final time. No more bathroom, no more glasses of water, certainly no snacks. The door's not open until 7, 10 in the morning. He's in there for 11 hours overnight.
So very quickly, you heard her saying the times, the evidence of how long he would be in that room. That's a long time to be in there. A long time without food, without drink, without any of that stuff, without a bathroom, running water. I mean, that's a really long time. And that right there, accompanied with all the other stuff, I mean, that's going to really hit home to the jury. Because, I mean, just imagine being in a room in pitch dark for that amount of time with nothing. No loved ones, no nothing, no phone, nothing. You can't see anything, right? Awful. So now let's take a moment and listen to some of what the defense has to say.
I want to start with sort of the thing that's based most in science, which is Dr. Rappa talking about a neuropsychological exam. So that neuropsychological exam, as Dr. Rappa testified to, has multiple parts. And this is testing that the psychological and psychiatric community relies on routinely. And it allows us to have data about a person to explain how they are the way they are and why they are the way they are. This neuropsychological testing has multiple parts, and it includes something from...
Now you can see a large part of the defense is going into this like scientific diagnoses, behavior patterns, persistence, all this kind of stuff. And my thought process is on this. While I do think that these are all contributing factors and things and whatnot, and obviously y'all know I'm not a psychologist, right? This is just from my little armchair over here, my little sofa chair. But cases like this are emotional. They're fact-driven and evidence-driven, but there's an emotional component because it's a child involved. And so when you start to get in here and you're trying to really just navigate this way around behavioral issues, and this is what caused this reaction from here and there, it's usually going to fall on deaf ears.
Has clinically elevated levels as it relates to inhibition and emotional regulation. And what Dr. Rappa told us is that means it explains this sort of persistent behavior that's not stopping, that becomes or has sort of a strong emotional reaction. He's not able to control that in the way another person might be. He also has a lack of inhibition. And that's why when he has consequences, that's not something that he's entirely understanding.
Now again, get it, got it, good, understood. You're describing a lot of children, right? Now this might be an extreme case here, and I understand it's a defense. She's going to try and put reason to it and say, look, this is how we arrived at this, right? It was A, B, and C going on. This is how we arrived. This is what we did. He was only trying to help the family and do this and do that, whatnot. But again, sometimes you can get so lost in something and so emotional about it because you heard him screaming and yelling at the kid, right? I have no doubt children, I mean, they can push everybody to their limits, right? This is part of the human experience. But in how one handles that is paramount, right? Especially in this day and age. And so all these combined factors of you locked him up, he can't go to the bathroom, you're screaming and yelling at him, you're putting your hands on him, you're doing this, you're doing that. It's just, it's too much, right? Nobody can handle that. This is a scenario that should have somehow had some third party stepping in at some point, and maybe they tried that all they could. Well, we got doctors, we got this, we got that. The other party, the contributing voice, could have been maybe the mother. It sounds like she went along with it though. I mean, granted, she hasn't had her trial yet. I'll be interested to see if she does at this point. I would plea out if I was her. But again, when you put all this up and then at the end of the day you're like, now let's go, how do we think it's going to sound to a jury? Again, I would have taken that 2 years and ran with it if I was him.
Probably an attachment type of disorder from the time that he lived in an orphanage. Again, there's no dispute that the Ferreter's actions exacerbated that, right? Dr. Rappa told us that. That's something that the defense is completely conceding. But both Wade Myers and Dr. Rappa say that this...
There's really no but to it. It's like, yes, these behaviors exasperated that. Of course they did. Of course it's going to make this worse, right? At the basis of it, a child is locked in a garage against their will in your home. Your child. Your child, adopted or not, doesn't matter. That's your child. You have locked them in the garage. I'm sorry. You can say all you want to, and again, I know she's a defense. That's what she's going to try and do. That's her job. So I can't fault her for that. But there's just, it's not one of those very defensible things. And I'm sure one thing with Tim is he was probably like, look, you want to send me to prison for a couple of years? Like, I wasn't doing anything wrong. The child themselves is saying, don't convict or don't. You heard what the victim said. So I'm sure in his world, and a little bit of entitled of, we can't go to prison for that. It's his fault. You know, and I think that's probably how they looked at it to some degree. Like, well, what else were we supposed to do? You know, we put him on meds, we tried taking him here, we tried doing that, but I mean, probably anything but creating an in-home jail. So all that being said, we already know how it went, but let's see what went down once the jury came back.
In the Circuit Court of the 15th Judicial Circuit, Criminal Division in and for Palm Beach County, Florida, case number 22 CF001136, BMB Division B. State of Florida versus Timothy Dunn Ferreter. Defendant. Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows. As to count 1, we find the defendant guilty of aggravated child abuse as charged in the information. As to count 2, we find the defendant guilty of false imprisonment as charged in the information. As to count 3, we find the defendant guilty of neglect of a child as charged in the information.
All right, so the court, I'm going to adjudicate the defendant in accordance with the verdict, guilty of the charge of aggravated child abuse, guilty of the charge of false imprisonment, and guilty of neglect. At this time, I'm going to remand the defendant to the custody of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department. That's without prejudice for you to file any type of motion that you deem appropriate, Ms. Murad, for pretrial release or release during pending appeal. This ruling today is without prejudice for me to receive that and consider that at the appropriate time. Let me get an idea as to what the state is looking for in terms of a sentencing hearing.
I can do it as soon as the defense can be ready. He is entitled to a PSI. I don't know what the defense's position is as to that.
I will waive PSI, Your Honor. This is a sentencing that I should be able to get done relatively quickly. Should the court have time.
Whoa, okay, you saw that. So first of all, guilty. I don't know if you saw his wife in the background, but she's like, you know, kind of collapsing and that guy's shaking his head no. But then another woman in the back row is like, yes, that's what she looks like yes, you know, yes, justice. Then, so these are two clips melded together because then the state and the defense say a couple of things. And of course, defense is like, let him be out. He's been out this whole time. He hasn't done anything. But the judge went with what the state said and like, let's go ahead and remand him into custody. You saw the look on his face. Like he was shocked. Like, what? And he turned around immediately, like telling his wife probably like, I love you or something like that. And then you saw he got up, turned around and was like hugging them. How often do we see, this is the first thing that went through my mind, in these cases like this, the cops let somebody do that? I mean, honestly, y'all, I was shocked. I was just like, really? Y'all are going to let him just get up and do that? Okay. That must be nice. You know, I was surprised, honestly, that the judge remanded him. I thought the judge was going to go with the defense and be like, okay, yeah, he can go get his stuff together. You know, so I was like, okay, good on the judge for seeing it for the seriousness that it is, because you never know, right? You never know in situations like this, especially someone like this who probably is shocked that they were going away. I mean, he turned down a plea deal and now he's looking at like 40 some years, right? So, I mean, come on. Okay, so let's kind of change things up and let's talk about some final thoughts of this. So, like I said, I know every situation, every person, every adoption is different, right? This is life, okay? So, in this case, while I was watching it, I was thinking back to volunteer situations I've done, like in aging out programs, people that I know who are foster parents and work in the system. Now, I get this is probably a particular type of adoption and whatnot, but seeing that system, and I'm thinking of one scenario where there's this one house that was very active and they were like licensed to handle all different types of situations with different kids. And so there would be kids that was like, look, they are required to have some kind of alarm on the door that goes off anytime that child opens the door. You know, and I'm talking about their bedroom door, you know what I'm saying? Very locked down, that type of thing. But they weren't living in a garage either, you know what I mean? Like they weren't putting the child out there. So I was thinking of these type things and I'm like, okay, granted, with Tim and Tracy, they might not have had these services available to them, you know, because of the type of adoption or whatever, because this wasn't like a foster situation and that. But there's other children in the house that were adopted. And I'm also thinking of other scenarios where there's a blend in the family of somebody's legally adopted and then there's other foster kids or in the process. And there's always people involved, you know, in the system coming through, that type thing. So that's one thing that kind of surprises me, is where I'm like, is there nowhere you could reach out to be like, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And then take all that aside, having the money to be like, look, we don't have that, but we got money. We have agency. We have means. Let's get an overnight nanny in here so that we know there's somebody overnight to just kind of be in the house, tend to, you know, whatever needs to go on, to keep from having to put our child in a jail in the garage, locked in there. Now, the whole other issue on that I get into, and again, I've already said it, but I'll say it 100 times over. I'm getting my pillow for security. My anxiety I could never rest knowing somebody was locked in a room and couldn't get out on their own in the house. Absolutely. I don't even care if it was their own bedroom with a lock on the outside. That would go all over me. I would be scared to death of what could happen. They're lucky nothing ever happened. I mean, can you imagine how this could have ended? Imagine that house burned down and that poor boy. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the part that I'm just like, now again, I get and I have empathy and sympathy towards people who are in these scenarios. And again, I'm thinking of like Dr. Phil. Like you've seen some of these Dr. Phil shows where people think of Catch Me Outside. How about that? Girl.
Did you say the hoes are laughing?
Yep.
So the audience are a bunch of hoes?
Yep. Catch me outside. How about that?
Huh?
Catch me outside. How about that?
Where they have these nightmare kids that are like bringing cops to the house every other day and all this. Now, it didn't sound like this kid was doing that though. That's why I'm like, this doesn't sound like it's that turned up, right? That Dr. Phil's knocking on your door. Yeah, but you see these things and you're like, as a parent or whatever, you're like, what would I do? What would I do in that scenario where it's like, what do you do? I get that. But again, the last thing I would think of would be to put my money and resources into building a jail in my garage. Now, also the part where going back to the contractor, where he was like saying how they walked him through that. They're like, oh, we have this office in Arizona. This is what I think that this became a slippery slope. I think it started off as one thing, and I'm not even saying that was a good thing, but it could have been like, oh yeah, we need this room for the infant, and we're kind of nervous about his behavior. Hey, we'll build you a little room out here. And even that's like incredibly questionable, because this is my thing. I'm like, why didn't you put the infant in your room? Like, meaning the parents' room. And if you're scared for the infant, all the more reason. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you have the infant in your own bedroom then? I can't imagine drawing straws and telling a child, hey, you get the garage. You know what I'm saying? Unless it was like a 17-year-old who was wanting to be out of the house, but even then you wouldn't lock them in there. You wouldn't let them not use the bathroom. I mean, that's the part right there too of like having to imagine how humiliating that must have felt to find your way to a bucket and then the next day be like, okay, go outside to the yard and clean your bucket out. I mean, come on, right? I mean, Jesus. Absolute insanity. So, that being said, I will never in my life just understand the reasoning. And again, everyone has a different walk. I'm not trying to excuse it away. But I think that they probably got lost in this and they're probably very entitled. And it sounds like he was like little Mr. I run my kingdom. And this is how it's going to be. Because hearing the way, when they're trying to garner sympathy of, well, the behavior did this and it was persistent and we were trying to protect and do all this. But then you hear the evidence of how he was talking to this child and the things that were going on where it was like this anger-driven thing. I'm like, I don't think this is all about protection. This was like corporal punishment. So again, the fact that he is in jail right now going through the exact same things that he put that child through is what you literally call karma. The sweet justice of karma. So he's up against 40 years now. He turned down 2 years. He's up against 40. Because he went to trial, he's getting something. Okay, it ain't 2 years. I can tell you that. He will be going away for a while. Now the wife is still, she has to go stand trial. If she doesn't take a plea deal, I don't know what to say about that. It's like at this point, it's like, girl, if you don't take a plea deal, you're insane, okay? Like, and I'm not trying to make, excuses for him or help him out, but I'm just saying from like a strategy standpoint, like if I was her, oh honey, I would have walked out of that courtroom right to the DA's office and said, where do I sign up? Now they might have to fluctuate how they do. I don't know how you do things. They don't have access to their children, right? So it's like, well, how do you do that? But again, it's just, go ahead and sign the papers and get done with it. So anyways, what do you think? Have you had, so this is one thing I'm curious to see in the comments. Have you had experience with nightmare children, children that have pushed you to your edge, troubled teens, this kind of thing? What do you think could have been done shy of this thing that we see here of building a jail in the garage, right? Like, what is your experience if you had this at all? Because I just feel like there was a bazillion things to do before this. Like this should never have even been an option, right? Never been on the plate. So let me know what you think about that. What sentence do you think he's going to get? Do you think she's going to plea out? Do you think she's crazy enough to take this to trial now, or entitled enough? I should say. So anyways, that said, y'all, send Roscoe Sofas back home so he knows that, you know, we don't want him to be locked up in the garage too, you know what I'm saying? He might be feeling left out, but anyways, if you're still watching, I appreciate it. Thank you. I know this is a long video, and, you know, again, let me know what you think in the comment section, and until we meet down in that comment section on the sofas, dishing and serving, I'll see y'all there.